As we continue to get closer to the 2025 college football season, I want to continue my series spotlighting starting quarterbacks for particular conferences. I've already done the ACC, the SEC, and the MAC, and in today's video, I want to introduce you to all the starting quarterbacks in the Big 12, go through who they are, their backstory, what they've done so far, and ultimately how good I think they are going to be. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about the Big 12 quarterbacks for 2025. Okay, so the first team we're going to talk about is the BYU Cougars, and they have an interesting player in McKay Hillstead. Obviously, Jake Retzloff ended up transferring over to Tulane, but going back in time, Hillstead was pretty much unknown. He went to Skyridge High School, which was located in Utah, and he was only a 3-star recruit in the class of 2023, and he'd end up going to Utah State. He would actually end up being decent for Utah State in 2023, as he threw for 1,062 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, while completing 60% of his passes. He then ended up transferring to BYU, and with Retzloff leaving, he's right now projected to be the starter. I don't know if he's actually going to get the job, as Bourget is also going to fight for it, but for now, he's probably the least known quarterback in the Big 12, and is probably my pick for worst right now. For Oklahoma State, they have finally moved on from both Alan Bowman and Spencer Sanders, and they will move forward with a transfer quarterback by the name of House Heine. He's probably one of the more unknown Big 12 quarterbacks, as he ended up going to Aledo High School and was actually really good while he was there. In fact, he passed for 2,800 yards and 27 touchdowns, and also ran for over 1,013 on the ground. He ended up surging up recruiting rankings as he went from just your average 3-star to the number 12 quarterback and a 4-star player in the class of 2024. Heine would arrive at TCU, but would obviously not get a chance to see the field, as they already had Josh Hoover as their starter. Still though, he did run for 65 yards as a backup, and then Heine decided to transfer over to Oklahoma State, where he's right now probably going to be the starter over Zane Flores, and Oklahoma State's got to hope he's going to be good, especially Mike Gundy, because they fell apart last year and they desperately need some new life, especially at the quarterback spot. As Scott Frost moves back to UCF for the 2025 college football season, he is a quarterback who has been around the block. It'll most likely be Taven Jackson, and going back in time, he went to Center Grove High School, was a 4-star recruit, and the brother of NBA player Trace Jackson Davis. While he was in high school, he ended up putting up really good numbers, as he threw for nearly 2,000 yards and 21 touchdowns as a senior, and was also considered one of the best players in Center Grove history. He would originally decide to commit to Josh Heupel in Tennessee though, and would arrive there in 2022. He completed 3 passes for 37 yards, before transferring back home to Bloomington, Indiana, to go play for the Indiana Hoosiers. He played a bit in 2023, throwing for 914 yards with 2 touchdowns and 5 picks, but he was later benched for Brendan Sorsby. In 2024, he was the backup to Curtis Rourke, and last year he helped them against Washington, throwing for 349 yards and 4 touchdowns with 3 more scores on the ground. Taven decided to transfer ahead of the 2025 season because of Fernando Mendoza, and he landed at UCF. He should be the starter, and he's a guy who can both pass and run the football, and has a good amount of experience. I don't think he'll be a world breaker by any means, but he should be alright, at least for UCF. The West Virginia Mountaineers will move in a new direction both at head coach and at the quarterback spot, as they will have Rich Rodriguez, and then quarterback Nico Marchiol should once again be playing for them. Going back in time, Marchiol ended up going to Hamilton High School, which was located in Chandler, Arizona, and I remember when he committed there. I made a video on him when he committed, but after originally being at Florida State, he ended up flipping to West Virginia and brought 8,000 passing yards and 91 touchdowns over to Morgantown. Marchiol was a 4-star recruit and the number 19 quarterback in the class of 2022, and so far during his time at West Virginia, he's been alright. I can't say he's gotten on the field that much, but in 2023, he passed for 247 yards with 2 touchdowns and 3 picks, and then this past year, Marchiol threw for 434 yards with 5 touchdowns and 2 picks. He's been solid as a backup, but now he will take over as the full-fledged starter, and in year 4, we'll see if he can blow up and become one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12. For now, he's a pretty big unknown. One of the most interesting quarterbacks on this list is going to be the new starter for Colorado, Caden Salter. He will replace Shedeur Sanders, and going back in time, Salter was a player who came out of Cedar Hill, Texas, and was actually one of the top players in the nation. He ended up finishing with nearly 6,000 yards and 52 passing touchdowns, while also rushing for nearly 1,700 yards and 26 touchdowns. As a recruit, Salter was actually a top 50 player nationally and the number 7 quarterback in the class of 2021. Unfortunately, he would never make it at Tennessee, as he would end up getting into some trouble. He would later transfer to Liberty, where he took over after Malik Willis, and in total in a couple of years there, had over 6,000 yards and over 70 touchdowns. Salter was a star, but after having a little bit of a down season in 2024, his stock would drop, but now he transfers to Colorado for his final year, and Coach Prime's hoping to get the most out of him. He's definitely going to be pretty exciting in my opinion, and has a really high ceiling and could definitely move up the list. Moving over to the Houston Cougars, they have a former 5-star at quarterback as Connor Weigman decided to transfer in from Texas A&M. Going to Bridgeland High School in Cypress, Texas, Weigman was one of the top quarterbacks in the class of 2022 and was really good. He ended up having over 3,800 yards and over 50 touchdowns as a senior and actually became a 5-star recruit. He was ranked as the number 3 quarterback and the 22nd best player nationally, and would decide to go to Texas A&M. This is one of the biggest gets at quarterback in school history, and Weigman was pretty good his freshman year, as he had 896 yards and 8 touchdowns in the last few games of the season. He ended up starting the first couple games of the 2023 season, throwing for 979 yards and 8 touchdowns, but then he would get hurt. He ended up being projected as a top 10 pick going into the 2024 season, but then everything would fall apart. He only threw for about 819 yards with 3 touchdowns and 5 picks, and was benched in favor of Marcel Reed. Weigman also sort of had a couple of temper tantrums, and he decided to find a new school and transfer across the state to the Houston Cougars. Willie Fritz desperately needs a new good quarterback, and Houston's hoping to compete in the Big 12, so maybe the former 5-star will figure it out, and this is a lot like Kyle Allen back in the day. Talking about a guy who desperately needs a bounce-back year in 2025, we need to talk about Noah Fifita. Going back in time, he ended up going to Servite High School, which was located in Anaheim, California, and he played with guys like Mason Graham and Tetaroa McMillan. That was one of the most loaded high school teams ever, but Fifita was sort of undersized and didn't really get that much attention. Going back in time, he ended up throwing for 7,200 yards and 83 touchdowns while he was at Servite and would be a 3-star recruit who would decide to commit to Arizona. He was listed as the number 38 quarterback in the class of 2022, and in his freshman year, he would play very sparingly. But in 2023, he would take over for Jaden DeLora, throwing for 2,900 yards and 25 touchdowns, and he was considered one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. Arizona broke out, but then they lost Jed Fish, and they brought in Brent Brennan. Despite still having both him and Tet McMillan back, the team wasn't as good. They missed the bowl game, and while he threw for 3,000 yards, which was a career high, he only had 18 touchdowns, and he doubled his interception total. He went from a Heisman sleeper to someone pretty much everybody forgot about, and he will definitely hope to bounce back in 2025 and hopefully bring back the excitement. I gotta be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Jalen Daniels this year, as he's another one of those quarterbacks who will now not stop playing college football, as this will be season number 6. Still though, he had a really cool story, as coming out of Lawndale, California, he was a hidden gem discovered by the Kansas staff, and he would eventually get an offer. He threw for 2,400 yards and 26 touchdowns as a junior, and would end up becoming a 3-star recruit and the number 61 dual-threat quarterback in the class of 2020. Daniels would play a bit as a true freshman in 2020, but really started to get better in 2021 as he helped them have that crazy victory over Texas. Over the next few years, Daniels then became the starter between 2022 and 2024, throwing for over 5,000 yards and close to 50 total touchdowns. Daniels also battled a couple of injuries though, but after having 14 touchdowns and 12 picks this past year, he's come back for his final year of eligibility, and Coach Leipold hopes that they can finally get the most out of Daniels, and KU can hopefully make a run at the Big Ten title. We'll have to see how Jalen does, but this is now year number 6 for him. The remaining Big 12 quarterbacks that we have to rank all sort of feel the same, and the first one we're going to talk about is Texas Tech quarterback Behren Morton. He ended up going to Eastland High School, which is located in the state of Texas. During his senior season, he threw for 3,600 yards and 37 touchdowns, and because of this, he was a blue-chip recruit who decided to sign with Texas Tech. Ranked as the number 11 quarterback and the 104th player nationally, on some sites he was considered the highest-ranked quarterback to ever sign with the Red Raiders, and he was obviously going to get plenty of hype. He'd have to wait a bit behind Tyler Shuck, but Morton eventually took over at the end of 2022, throwing for 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. He then started once again in 2023, throwing for 1,700 yards and 15 touchdowns, and then last year, Morton became one of the top young quarterbacks in the nation, throwing for 3,300 yards and 27 touchdowns. Texas Tech also had a good season, and now with a good coach, a ton of money, and a lot of hype, Morton is getting NFL attention for 2026, but at minimum, could be one of the top quarterbacks in the Big 12, and is someone that could definitely become mainstream by the end of the season. Moving over to the Utah Utes, they are now finally done with Cam Rising, and they move forward with a quarterback who is very different. I've done a full-length video on Devon Dampier, and you guys should check that one out, but going to Saguaro High School in Arizona, Dampier at one point was getting a ridiculous amount of recruiting attention, but sort of just flamed out. I don't really know what happened, but he settled as a 3-star recruit and would end up having to go to New Mexico. I mean, there's nothing against New Mexico, but he was named the Arizona Player of the Year, threw for 2,400 yards, and was an insane athlete. While at New Mexico, Dampier would eventually take over, and this past season, he threw for 2,700 yards with 12 touchdowns and 12 picks, but he also ran for 1,200 yards and 19 touchdowns. Dampier was a true dual-threat quarterback who is a crazy athlete, and he will now head to Utah. Utah returns a ton of starters, they bring in the New Mexico offensive coordinator, and it looks like he's set up for success. He'll definitely have to clean up his turnovers though if he wants to be successful, but Dampier is definitely one of the more unique quarterbacks in the Big 12 this year. Personally, my favorite quarterback in the Big 12 for 2025 is going to be the long golden-haired quarterback Avery Johnson from Kansas State. Going back in time, Johnson was a 4-star recruit from Mays High School in Kansas, and that state doesn't typically produce a ton of top-end quarterback talent, but Avery was just different. As a senior, he threw for 2,800 yards and 29 touchdowns with just 3 picks, and he also had 800 yards and 15 scores. He was ranked as the number 9 quarterback and the 85th best player in the class of 2023, and as a true freshman for Kansas State, he'd end up playing a little bit. He would pass for 479 yards and 5 touchdowns, but he also ran for 7 touchdowns. He had a crazy performance against Texas Tech, and he was still a bit underwhelming in 2024, but still really good. He passed for 2,700 yards with 25 touchdowns, and also ran for 607. Avery returns as one of the most polarizing quarterbacks in the conference, as he might have the highest ceiling, and he's the guy that I want to watch the most. Up next, we get to who in my opinion is probably the most underrated quarterback in the Big 12, and that is Brendan Sorsby. Going back in time, Sorsby went to Lake Dallas High School in Texas, but was listed as the number 101 quarterback in the nation, and I guess I can kind of see why. He ended up having an ankle injury, which would limit him to just 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns passing, and then 815 on the ground, and as I said, he decided to go to Indiana, where in his first year he was a backup, but in year 2 in 2023, he took over for Taven Jackson, who was struggling. By the end of the season, Sorsby had thrown for 1,600 yards with 15 touchdowns, and it also ran for 286 more and 4 touchdowns. He would decide to transfer to Cincinnati ahead of the 2024 season because of NIL, and in total, he had 2,800 yards and 18 touchdowns, and he also ran for about 509. That was a pretty good stat line, but nobody talked about it because he played on a losing team. But going into 2025, Sorsby has a chance to help Cincinnati get back on the map. For Iowa State, they have the son of a former NFL tight end, and that is Rocco Becht. I personally would have thought it was J.J. Cole who'd be the starter in this spot a couple of years ago, but Rocco Becht ended up proving everybody wrong. He ended up going to Wiregrass Ranch High School, which was located in Florida, and while he was in high school, he ended up throwing for 1,800 yards and 23 touchdowns as a senior, and the 3-year starter became the number 61 quarterback in the class of 2023. He would arrive at Iowa State with very little fanfare, but he became the starter in 2023, throwing for 3,100 yards and 23 touchdowns. Then this past year, he had 3,500 yards and 25 touchdowns. He helped lead Iowa State to one of their best seasons in a long time in a Big 12 title appearance, and now he returns as a senior, and he has a ton of hype. For our third to last quarterback, we now have Sawyer Robertson. Going to Coronado High School, which is located in the city of Lubbock, Texas, Sawyer Robertson was honestly a pretty big deal. He was the Gatorade Player of the Year at one point. He would end up having 11,302 yards and 135 touchdowns. Because of this, Sawyer was ranked as the number 21 quarterback and the 205th best player, and that was all the way back in the class of 2021. Sawyer would commit to Mississippi State, and he'd play with the Bulldogs for just 2 years before transferring to Baylor. He threw for 800 yards as a backup in 2023, and then when DeQuan Finn got hurt, he ended up taking over, throwing for 3,000 yards and 28 touchdowns. Robertson's one of the newer starters, but he also has a ton of hype and is going to help Baylor have a really good season. Our second to last Big 12 quarterback we need to talk about is Josh Hoover. He ended up going to Rockwall Heath High School in Texas, and I feel like a lot of these Big 12 quarterbacks are from the state of Texas, and he was definitely an underrated gem. He ended up passing for 3,200 yards and 40 touchdowns as a senior, but he wasn't getting a lot of attention. He had originally decided to commit to Indiana before flipping to TCU. Hoover was only listed as a 3-star recruit and the number 41 quarterback in the class of 2022, So when he got to TCU, nobody really expected him to break the world. He'd end up taking over at the end of the 2023 season, throwing for 2,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. Then this past year, he was one of the top QBs in the nation, throwing for just under 4,000 yards and 27 touchdowns. He has a ridiculous amount of hype, and while the NFL scouts aren't exactly in love with him, he potentially has a chance to lead the country in passing yards and help TCU get back to national relevance. And last but not least, we have to talk about Arizona State quarterback Sam Leavitt. Going back in time for him, he ended up going to West Linn High School, which is located in Oregon, and he was one of those guys who sort of blew up towards the end of his high school career. He ended up passing for 3,200 yards and 36 touchdowns, while also rushing for nearly 700 more and 8 scores. He ended up blowing up into a 4-star recruit as he became the number 18 quarterback in the class of 2023 and decided to go to Michigan State. In his first year with the Spartans, Leavitt would get on the field a little bit, as he'd end up passing for 139 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. Ahead of the 2024 season, he would transfer to Arizona State, hoping for an opportunity to play. He'd end up winning out that starting job, and what he did was incredible. He threw for 2,900 yards and 24 touchdowns, ran for about 505, and then led Arizona State to the Big 12 championship, won it, and went to the college football playoff. Now Leavitt is getting a ton of 2026 NFL draft hype. Arizona State's projected to win the Big 12, and he's considered the best quarterback in the conference. We'll see how he does in year 2, and if there's going to be a sophomore slump, but for now, he leads the way for the Big 12, and I'm really excited to watch him. What do you guys think? Who do you think is the best Big 12 quarterback? Who is the most underrated? And which conference or position group should I do next? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.